I hate when I obsess over things. I spend way too much time comparing gear, looking for best prices, and dreaming up ways on how to put all this tech to work. And this is especially true during Black Friday, Cyber Monday weekend. So, the only logical thing to do is to make a video about it. Right? So you're looking for a new camera? Well, I can help. Hello, I am Andre Correa, and this is Andre Correa Now, a show about the art of filmmaking, the craft behind it, and the technologies that make it all possible. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the best hybrid camera deals for the holiday season of 2019. For the sake of keeping things concise, I'm only going to talk about 3 brands. I know that there are other brands out there. I know a lot of them are great. I'm actually very interested in learning more about the Fuji X-T3. I think it's a phenomenal camera, but I am limiting to only these brands as I have worked with them in the past, and I can personally recommend them and personally tell you the areas where these things fall short. My first recommendation is going to be the Panasonic G7. There is no better camera for less than $500 that you can get right now. This little guy shoots at 4K, 30 frames a second, fantastic color science, and it comes with a flippy screen. Combined with an easy-to-use menu system, great ergonomics, and a sweet package sale price, this thing is a no-brainer for anybody wanting to stay less than $500 for a camera. Oh, and did I mention, it comes with a kit lens. Now here's some things you want to keep in mind with the G7. The autofocus is lackluster. It works fine for photography. It's not really usable for video. So we're going to be having to do a lot of manual focusing. So just be aware of that. Although this camera is going to give you very usable, nice images, this is not a low light beast by any means. So make sure that you have enough money in your budget for lighting because you are going to need it. And this camera does not have IBIS, the in-body image stabilization, which Panasonic has the best in the market. So if you're looking for that, our next camera has got you covered. If IBIS is a must-have for you, then for $200 more, you should be looking into the Panasonic G85, which basically is just an updated G7. For only $200 more, you get the IBIS, an extra lens, and weather sealing. So if you want to spend a little bit less than $700, you get 2 lenses and an amazing camera. Next up is the Panasonic G9. Now the G9 has a different sensor than the G7 and G85. You have IBIS, which is very good in the G9. You have weather sealing. You have 2 card slots. But the main difference with the G9 is going to be in the Kodak. The Kodak of the G9 is actually very powerful. You're talking about 4K up to 60 frames a second, 422 10-bit. That is a significant difference from the G7 and the G85. So if you don't care about the kit lenses and you just want to get perhaps like the sweet spot, the G9 might be it as far as image quality goes, because once you go from 8-bit to 10-bit, and once you go into that 422 Kodak, the image quality jumps as far as better performance and all those things. So there's a big performance difference between the G85 and the G9. And again, you're looking at other features like the dual card slots, weather sealing. Even though it has the same shortcomings of the other Panasonic cameras, being that the autofocus is not that great. It's not a low light camera. If you have proper lighting, again, the images you can get from this camera, especially with that better Kodak, they're going to be amazing. If you already have lenses, or if you're going to be bringing Canon lenses or some other lens brand with an adapter into the Panasonic world, this might be a sweet spot. In the less than $1,500 category, we have the Panasonic Lumix GH5. Let me just start by saying that this thing is a beast. And for less than $1,300 right now on sale. If this deal was around a year ago, this Sony shooter would be filming in the Panasonic GH5 today. if you're going to be doing narrative work, this is an amazing tool, because not only does it give you amazing image quality, but if you are working within a control environment, the limitations of the Micro Four Thirds sensor kind of go away. If you have proper lighting and you have perhaps a speed booster, especially for this price, you are going to be not really having low light issues at all. I would say that where this camera might fall short is in the autofocus system. If you're going to be doing the kind of work that requires you to have, good autofocus all the time. For example, I do a lot of documentary style interviews. For the last year, I've been working on my documentary show, and I need to have autofocus because oftentimes I'm working with someone else, or sometimes I'm working by myself, and I'm running multiple cameras at the same time. I need autofocus to be working all the time. So the GH5 may not be a good camera for that if you're completely alone, if you have multiple cameras running at once and subjects are moving around. That might not be ideal. People can get away with it. You just might have to get really good at pulling focus manually. Moving into the Sony world, for less than $500, we're looking at the A6000, which is an older camera at this point. The A6100 has been released already. But for less than $500, that's really the only Sony camera that you can buy. I would not recommend this camera for somebody who is mainly doing video. And two reasons why. Mainly, it does not have any of the picture profiles that make the Sony cameras more powerful. So you don't get S-Lug 2, you don't get S-Lug 1, you don't get Cine 1, Cine 2, none of that. You just get whatever the standard picture profile is on the Sony cameras. Second, the autofocus here is not stellar. It's just okay. I don't think it does much for video. I think because it has a similar sensor to the A6400, A6500, you're going to get really great pictures. If you're a photographer, this camera would serve you well if you want to stay less than $500 on the Sony cam. But where, again, it falls short is going to be in the autofocus side of things. It's going to fall short in the picture profile side of things. And this camera does not shoot 4K. Even though I heard reports that the 1080 in this camera isn't bad, you really want to be shooting at 4K at this point if you are able to. So this camera is not going to be able to provide that. I would... If you have less than $500 to spend, I would, and if the choice is between this camera and the G7 that we talked about before from the Panasonic side, I would go with the G7 because the G7 is going to give you a better picture quality than this is for video. So if video is your thing, then I would say don't get this camera, but get the Panasonic G7. If you're looking to spend less than $1,000 in the Sony camp, look no further than the Sony A6400. This is a camera that I own and I love it. I have recommended this camera to my friends and family without any hesitations. I think it's one of the best bang for the bucks out there. Right now, I don't think the camera is particularly on sale. It's still relatively a new camera. It came out maybe 6-7 months ago. But the nice thing about the A6400 is that it has improved color science, slightly better than the A6500. The battery life is better. The autofocus is noticeably better. And the camera has the same processor as the Sony A9, which is a much more expensive camera. So it's a bit faster. The menus are improved. Now, given that the menus from Sony are never fantastic, that's one of the pitfalls of this all Sony cameras, that the menu system is cumbersome. But it's slightly improved on the A6400 versus the A6500 and the A6300, which this camera replaced. The other nice thing too is that with this camera, you're gonna get S-Lug 2, S-Lug 3, and a new high log gamma, which is really fantastic when it comes to shooting outside. I think that, again, for less than $1,000, I would look no further. This is the camera for you. Now, things to consider about the A6400 is that it does not have IBIS. I don't feel like IBIS is such a big deal with the Sony camera, especially the APS-C Sony cameras, because the IBIS on the Sonys don't do a whole heck of a lot. I mean, they improve a little bit. I have the A6500, and we are going to talk about that camera because the camera is on sale. But, it really doesn't, it's not like a huge noticeable difference. When you're shooting with Panasonic camera, the IBIS is noticeably better. I've seen footage of people just walking around holding the camera, and that thing is super smooth. You're not going to get that with the A6500 or even the A6600 that just came out. Even the A7, you don't get that level of stabilization. You're really going to need to get a gimbal. But the nice thing about this camera, because it's less than $1,000, you could invest on a gimbal. Any gimbal would be better than in-body image stabilization as far as getting smooth shots. So there is that. Overall, the only things that I would say are hindrances in this camera are just a few quirks that Sony has. For example, right now I shoot with an external monitor, and once this camera is attached to an HDMI external monitor, then face tracking gets disabled for some reason in 4K, which is bad, because you do lose a little bit of the autofocus capability. But having said that, I never had an issue with the A6400 where it loses me very easily. So the autofocus is responsive enough that even though phase tracking goes out with an external monitor, you still have a very responsive system. One of the criticisms that this camera gets is the codec. The codec is 100 megabits a second. It's a bit older. It's only 8-bit. But and Panasonic's codec is better. It just is. But the thing I would say is the autofocus is a big deal. Again, I do a lot of filmmaking that is run and gun, and there's a lot of interviews, and sometimes I'm running multiple of these cameras at the same time. I need autofocus to work. If an image is out of focus, there's nothing I can do in post to bring that back. So if the choice becomes get a better codec, a 10-bit codec versus a 8-bit codec that actually autofocus properly, I'd rather have the 8-bit codec that autofocus properly. That's just me, and that's why these are different tools for different jobs. So in the perfect world, you could have a GH5 or a G9, and then have these cameras when you need the autofocus, and then the other cameras when you need the ultimate in image quality. So one is not better than the other. They all have their pros and cons. It's just picking the right camera for the job. But if you need IBIS in the Sony system, you can go with the A6500. The A6500 is the predecessor to the A6600 that just came out a couple of days ago. So they're very similar. The A6600 has better autofocus, basically the best autofocus of any camera in the APS-C world, and the Sony side of things. It's amazing. It doesn't have the hindrance of losing face tracking when you put the external monitor. But the A6500 can be had for less than $1,000 body only right now, which is a pretty good deal. It has very good autofocus. You still get S-Log 1 and 2 and Cine and all the other picture profiles that you can upload and change and all that stuff. You don't get the flip-up screen like the A6400 has. But if you need to have IBIS, this for less than $1,000, this is the camera to have. Right now with the sale, like I said, less than $1,000, you can have the A6500. If you want to stay under $1,000 and you don't care about video, so if your focus is photography, one of the nicest deals around and probably one of the cheapest ways to get into the Sony full frame camera world is going to be the A7 Mark II. Now this is the predecessor to the A7 III, and again, if you're doing photography only, This will serve you really well. You get the full frame look for less than $1,000. You know, there is something to the full frame look. There's something to have the extra stops of low light gathering capability that these smaller sensors don't have. But I would not recommend that camera for somebody who's doing video. Just like the A6000, the A7 II does not have 4K capabilities. So you're stuck with 1080p. And in addition to that, you're looking at the older color science from Sony. So, and the autofocus is pretty bad. You know, if you're going with the A7 II for video, you might as well not even bother with the autofocus because it's not going to be usable. You're going to have to do a lot of manual focus pulling. So if you're a photographer only, the A7 is a recommend. If you're going to do video, I would take that $1,000 and I would get the A6400 that we talked about previously, because that is more of a video-centric camera. Even though these are both hybrids, the features on the A6400 are going to serve you better for video than the A7 Mark II. If you want to stay less than $2,000, there's really nothing that compares to the Sony A7 Mark III. When compared to the A7S, which used to be the low light king, it comes pretty close, and in some tests I've actually seen it either match it or slightly beat it. So you're gonna get amazing low light performance. You have a full frame sensor there. And the nice thing about this full frame sensor is that not only it records or outputs to 4K, but in fact, you are recording in 6K and then you're downsampling to 4K. So even though your image is going to be 4K, the sensor is capturing enough information that's the equivalence of 6K. So it's a full sensor readout. With the A7 III, you also get all the picture profiles that you get with the A6400. So you get S-Log1, 2, Cine profiles, and high log gamma. One of the things that you do want to keep in mind is that when you go into a full frame system, you are paying more for the body, but you're going to really pay a lot more for the lenses, especially if you're going to go with the Sony brand lenses. Some of them can be as costly as the camera body. So it's something that you kind of have to, when you're making the decision to go full frame, you have to calculate that the batteries are going to cost more money, the lenses are going to cost more money. You know, most other things would be the same because they're interchangeable, but you're going to pay more for some of the accessories for the camera. All right, before we move into the Canon world, do you know what the one thing is that you can do right now that allows you to learn about the art of filmmaking, the craft behind it, and the technologies that make it all possible? For less than $500 from Canon, we have nothing. Nothing. I have cameras from Canon that I would actually consider purchasing for one reason or another. One of them is the Canon 77D. I think the 1080p that comes out of the camera is decent. I actually enjoy using my Canon T6i, but I could not find a Canon camera for less than $500 that I could recommend. So there are no recommendations for a less than $500 Canon camera, unfortunately. The next camera up is going to be the Canon RP for less than $1,000. So for $999, you can get a full frame sensor, relatively newer camera, comes with an adapter, so you could use your old glass. I think that if to go into the Canon world, you're looking at an entry point of $1,000 just for body alone. So unfortunately, that leaves some people, behind. The 77D is a good camera, especially for photography only. I actually would love to get that camera. I like the way it feels and everything else, but I would not recommend that be a camera for somebody whose main focus is video. So, the Canon RP. 4K, not the greatest, cropped. I think the crop factor there is about 1.8, which is very aggressive, I should say. The one thing that Canon has going for itself is the dual pixel autofocus system, but unfortunately the RP has some weird quirks when it comes to shooting 4K with the dual pixel autofocus. It, for whatever reason, it seems not to work very well and not to be as reliable. So again, I think this camera would be a good camera for somebody who's into photography and favors ease of use versus leading edge technology. The camera feels good on hand. It has a flippy screen. It has an amazingly easy menu system, which is a real thing. If the technology gets in your way of the art, if you have to sit there and try to figure out how do you get the functions that you want, that can be a hindrance. It's one of the problems that I have with Sony. The menu system can be so complicated that by the time you find what you want, the shot's gone, So there is a real value to having ease of use in the field. And Canon's got that, perhaps better than anybody else. So if you're a type of person that values the user experience, meaning that you like to pick up the camera, it feels great in your hand, and it's easy to use. It's a pleasure to use because the way it feels and the way the articulating screen is, the menu systems are easy, then the RP might be for you. I don't think this camera is really for somebody who is, again, heavy on video or somebody who wants leading edge technology. So it's a recommend. It's on sale now, but just a mild recommendation. I don't think I can fully endorse this camera at this point. Although it's not on sale, for less than $1,500, the 90D could be compelling for some people. This camera has 4K, 30 frames a second, and now, due to a software update, it actually has 24 frames a second, which is very nice. It's not a full frame camera, so surprisingly enough, the 90D with a APS-C sensor has better 4K performance than the camera that we just talked about, the Canon RP, that has a full frame sensor. I think that I would say if you're going to be doing YouTube stuff and you don't care about grading your images super heavily, I think the 90D could be good for some people. The camera feels amazing in your hand. Every time I pick one up, it just feels perfect. And if I think I'm only doing photography work, it's feasible to use that camera as your main shooter. I think for some folks who do videography or filmmaking, you may want something a little bit more robust, something with C-Log in the Canon world. But for most people, I think this is a feasible option. Now, this camera is not on sale, so that's something to consider, but the links are in the description below. You're just not gonna find huge discounts because it literally just came out. Having said that though, I do think the camera is a bit overpriced for what it offers. I think if this was a sub $1,000 camera, it would sell really well, but at the price point it is, I think it's about $1,200. It's less than $1,500, but when you start adding lenses and things like that, it goes up really fast. I think that it's not such a appealing proposition, but I would recommend it for somebody who, again, kind of like the RP, wants something that's fun to shoot, wants something that's easy, it's very easy, something that's enjoyable. You want good 4K, but you don't necessarily need the leading edge as far as shooting technology goes. Finally, we come to the Canon EOS R. And there is a lot to like here. We finally have a camera that has C-Log, which is Canon's log profile, which is very nice. You have good color science from Canon. It has all the ergonomics. It has a flip-up screen, or I should say flip-out screen, because it goes to the side. It's fully articulated. The menu is really easy to use. There are some really cool innovations in this camera that I thought were really nice when I first saw it. One of them is that you have these you have one additional ring on the lens, and you can assign that to be anything you want. So technically you could assign that to be your aperture, and you can control your aperture right from the lens, which is really, really cool. Kind of like a cinema lens. And then you also have this touch bar swipe thing on the back that you can, assign that to be different things. Like, for example, you could assign that to be ISO, and you can, adjust things from the back of the camera that way. So from a functional standpoint, it's a very interesting camera, and I think it would be very enjoyable to shoot with that camera for that reason. And I think that's what Canon kind of goes for. They go for the enjoyment factor. The images that I see people who have the EOS R, the images are phenomenal. You're going to be very happy with the still photography that you get from this camera. Even though it's not a sports photography kind of a camera, it doesn't shoot very fast. It does not have IBIS. That's one negative thing about it. But if you're looking for something fun and capable, the EOS R is solid. I think when the EOS R first came out, I want to say that for body only, you were looking at about $2,400. And right now with the sale, you're looking at $1,700 approximately with just the body only. If you want to use your older Canon lenses, you can. You are going to, sometimes they will include an adapter, or you can get a $100 adapter that will allow you to put your EF and EFS glass on the EOS R. The nice thing about that is because, and that's the good thing and the bad thing about it, in 4K mode, the camera has a crop. And it's a heavy crop, it's a 1.8 crop, which is not necessarily good because you're paying for the full frame sensor. But in 4K, you don't get a full frame readout. But what that allows you to do is to put, especially if you're coming from like a T6i or 77D or 80D, you can put that cheaper EFS glass onto the EOS R. Now, for video, you won't have any vignetting because it will crop down, it will be fine. But again, you're using a smaller portion of the sensor, which is not technically ideal. Now, just for a quick comparison, keep in mind that the A7 the Sony A7 Mark III gives you a full sensor readout at 6K, and it converts that down to 4K. This camera, the EOS R, is cropping that image and then somehow give you 4K. Maybe you don't need all the pixels to do 4K, but in either case, it's a different way to get there, and I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing for video makers. Again, I've seen guys that shoot in the EOS R video stuff in the EOS R, and it looks phenomenal. The dynamic range is good. It's just one of those things that if you want to get the leading edge, most bang for your buck, I think that the other offerings from Panasonic, like the GH5 and the Sony a6400, the A7 III, they're gonna give you better video quality and more robust things. Even though Canon has technically a higher bit rate, I just don't know. So I would say the EOS R is a recommendation for folks, again, who want something easy to use, a powerful camera nonetheless. Just because it's a little bit below the Sony doesn't mean it's not a powerful camera, and it doesn't mean that you can do a lot of fantastic work with it. And again, for some people, the people who are perhaps not as technologically inclined, they and it really for everyone, like if you don't want technology to get in your way, if you just want to pick up a camera and go, the EOS R is a phenomenal choice. So how did I do? Did I talk about the camera you wanted? Did I leave it out of the list? Let me know in the comments below. But this is going to be it for me today. I am Andre Correa, and this is Andre Correa Now, and I'll see you next time.